Welcome to the second video on Chapter 1, Reasoning and Geometry, the lesson on conditional statements. So in the first video for this lesson, we talked about a premise and how it contains an if, the hypothesis, then the conclusion, and we started using P's and Q's. So we also can use arrows to indicate this language of if P, then Q. So for example, we would write P, if P, that leads to Q. So if P, then Q, we can have that arrow there. The converse flips it around and says if Q, then P. So we start with this premise, and here's an example here. If you mess with the bull, then you get the horns. Well, based on the original premise here, if you mess with the bull, that's P, then you get the horns, that's Q. That's what we learned in the last video. The converse of that would now be rewriting it. So we would say if, but now we're going to say you get the horns. So if you get the horns, horns, then you mess with the bull. And we can make it past tense because it makes sense with the language. Then you messed with the bull. So a premise is our original if-then statement. The converse takes those hypotheses and conclusions, the P's and Q's, and flips them around. So this is our new statement. If you get the horns, then you mess with the bull. So example 3 has 5 examples. We're going to go ahead and do the first 2 together. And what we need to keep in mind here is that it's asking for the converse. And so in order to recognize the converse, we have to remember that the premise is if P, then Q. The converse is if Q, then P. So this is what we're going to be interested in. But first, I want to make sure we can actually identify P and Q. So if it is raining, so after if comes P. So if it is raining, then I bring my umbrella. After then is the Q, because this is our original premise, if P, then Q. So when we switch it around to write our converse, it's if I bring my umbrella, here's the Q, if I bring my umbrella, then it is raining. Oops, try to just switch the color around. So you see that the words if and then are staying in the same spot. I'm not going to make it then I bring my umbrella if it is raining, because then you're just reordering this original, like it's still the same hypothesis and conclusion. We're essentially redoing that with this converse. So if I bring my umbrella, then it is raining. Number 2, I will go swimming tomorrow if it is hot. This is interesting because it's actually flipping it around. You have to find that word if first. Well, if is the whole way over here. If it is hot, then I will go swimming tomorrow. So this over here, after the word if, is the P. I will go swimming tomorrow is the Q. Now, I know it might look like this is Q, then P, if Q, then P, because that's the order of the sentence. But if is still with the P over here. We need to make it if Q. So it is going to be a little bit different where we say if I go swimming tomorrow, then it is hot. So again, if we compare the order of the original sentence here, it looks like I didn't switch anything around, but I did because the if was in the middle here. So you have to really pay attention to whether or not it's actually in an original if-then form. Go ahead and try the next 3 on your own. Let's go over these answers. If it is a birthday party, I will buy a gift. Converse would be if I buy a gift, then it is a birthday party. Number 4, if I study hard for the quiz, then I will get a homework pass. Converse, if I get a homework pass, then I study hard for the quiz. Number 5 is one of those ones that switched around. We will make districts if we win tomorrow. If we win tomorrow, this is P. Making districts is Q. So putting that into the converse, it's if we make districts, then we will win tomorrow. Now that we have the premise and the converse conditional statements understood, we're going to learn two more, the inverse and the contrapositive. The inverse negates the original premise. So if P, then Q, negating it means if not P, then not Q. And we are literally just going to add the word not in the sentence. If not P, then not Q. Contrapositive negates the converse. So if Q, then P becomes if not Q, then not P. So what's really important to understand is that these negative symbols in the symbolism here with the letters and the arrows and things like that represents the word not, or negating the original part of the sentence. So what we're going to do with this statement here, all Holsteins are cows, is we're going to write all four conditional statements, because you can see it's not even in the if-then form. We're going to flip it for the converse, then we're going to negate both of those to create the inverse and the contrapositive. Here we go. The original premise would be if it is a Holstein, then it is a cow. Switching the hypothesis and the conclusion locations creates the converse, which means if it is a cow, then it is a Holstein. Now we're going to negate both of those to turn in the inverse and contrapositive. So the inverse would read, instead of if it is a Holstein, then it is a cow, if it is not a Holstein, then it is not a cow. And finally, the contrapositive, remember, is the negation. It's negating the converse. So if it is a cow, then it is a Holstein. Contrapositive would say if it is not a cow, then it is not a Holstein. You could also relate the inverse to the contrapositive, where if it's not a Holstein, then it's not a cow, then you're just switching the location of the kind of P's and Q's from that one. However, it helps you remember the relationship between P's and Q's, whatever works for you. Last one together. If you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. So I just went ahead and wrote that original statement in the premise section, because really there is the word then here. It's kind of implied. Remember I talked about comprehending the sentence to understand that it is actually an if-then. So if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. The converse, well, first let's make sure we understand what the P and Q are. If you're not part of the solution, so not part of the solution would be your P, then your part of the problem would be your Q, because that's from our original premise. We will now flip that so that the converse is if Q, then P. If you're part of the problem, then you're not part of the solution is the converse. Now, as we get into the inverse and the contrapositive, where we're starting to negate things, this is going to be a little trickier. You have to be extra careful because it's already a negative statement if you're not part of the solution. So not part of the solution would actually mean that you are part of the solution. So when we take this premise and we negate it for the inverse, instead of saying you're not part of the solution, we would say if you are part of the solution, then you're not part of the problem. So remember that the inverse is if not P, then not Q. So you have to be extra careful when you're negating something that already is a negative concept. So the contrapositive is, now I'm going to take this converse and I'm going to say if you're not part of the problem, then you are part of the solution. So we took the converse and negated it. So if not Q, then not P. This concludes the second video and final video for Lesson 4 from Chapter 1, Reasoning and Geometry, about conditional statements. How do we write different forms of conditional statements? The answer is to identify the hypothesis, which is P, and the conclusion, Q, and describe the relationship between the two.